So during these Divine Mother sessions, we will cover a range of different topics from the perspective of yogic and tantric practices, but how practices are formulated, but also from the perspective of principle, because I guess it depends who you ask, but it depends who you ask what Divine Mother means. You get different kinds of answers. But myself, having a background in Hindu Tantra and more specifically Shakta Tantra, also Shaiva Tantra, but Shakta practices, my definition of Divine Mother, the way how I look at it is that, we can look at it broadly as basically all life force, life force in everything, aliveness in everything. And like you have heard me say it many times, it sounds very similar than saying that all beings have Buddha nature, doesn't it? So a very broad definition and also a simple definition of Divine Mother is that it's aliveness in all life. You could say, Shaktas might say that it is life itself. Another kind of definition that I could give for Divine Mother is to look at it from a bit more yogic or traditional perspective. So I mentioned Shakta yoga, so Shakta type of Hindu Tantra, Indian Yoga Tantra. And that word Shakta or Shakti literally means force or power. And that, because it has the I in the ending, the letter I, Shakti, it means feminine power. So, if you ask any Shakta person who practices in Shakta tradition, they will say that their view is that all life is based on this feminine power, feminine spiritual force called Shakti. And then to take it, look at it from the perspective of tantric practices, as you know, also in our method we have Dasha Mahavidya, mainly the 10 wisdom goddesses that have deities, so Shaktis, feminine spiritual powers that practitioners use to know themselves, know ourselves, to do purification practice. So in a very simple terms, I would give Divine Mother those two definitions that are not opposed to each other, but complement and fulfill each other. And I think that it is very good, the Buddhist view, the Mahayana Buddhist view of Buddha nature, and then emptiness of phenomena, that all phenomena internal in our mind, thoughts, emotions, and so on, energies, as well as external, are ultimately empty. This is very useful doctrine, very useful teaching, because if we have a good presentation of what emptiness means and what Buddhist meditation basically is, it can change our lives, because we can replace our ignorance, existential ignorance, with wisdom, existential wisdom, which means that we, instead of knowing ourselves as this small I, me, alone in this world, trying to going through the struggles that we go through, when we don't have that sense of self anymore, things suddenly feel very different. We see ourselves very differently, and things around us very differently, and then how to say, connect or relate to with other people and our surroundings and events in a different way, less selfish, less self-centered way. We're able to see the broader picture. And so it is very useful. What I started saying is that it is very useful and practical to transform our ignorance and our self-delusion into wisdom with the view of emptiness. And also Buddhism has kind of like, you could say, Divine Mother practices. So, Buddhism explains that there are these different bodies, different kayas. Dharmakaya, or literally phenomena body. Body of phenomena is what is realized when you do emptiness meditation, and you realize what this selflessness, what it means. Then you attain or realize the body of Dharma, Dharmakaya, the body of phenomena, Dharmakaya. And then another popular term, Sanskrit term in Buddhism is Sambhogakaya. Sambhogakaya. Kaya, again, body, and then Sambhoga means, means that when something is balanced or even, and bhoga means pleasure. So, for example, if someone has any type of sensual pleasure, let's say sex, for example, that would be called, I think it's also in Hindi language, it would be called bhoga. Bhoga. But when it's bhoga, it means that the pleasure is balanced. So I like to translate the term Sambhogakaya as enjoyment body. Not the body of blind desires and momentary pleasures, but pleasure that is even, balanced, timeless. So I started saying that in Buddhism there are also like Divine Mother in Buddhism. Well, maybe I'll come back to that later. There was just some point that came to my mind, but what this enjoyment body means is well, simply that each one of us has a Buddha nature, this awakened nature, this pure nature inside us, in our minds, in our bodies, that cannot be given, cannot be taken away. It can only be veiled because of self-based ignorance. So, we do that ourselves. Nobody veils our basic nature for us. We do that ourselves. So this is actually a very unique and important point when discussing Buddha Dharma, because in other religions, like for example, if you're American or European, you're likely being exposed to Christianity. So there, a lot, depending on denomination actually, but you know, the view is different. So you can't really, in those views, not everything is on your responsibility. But in Buddha Dharma it is. So that's the good news. You know, we have made ourselves deluded, but we can also undelude ourselves. So this is not dependent on some external figure or person. Let's just put it that way, simply. So the enjoyment body, it means that our basic nature is blissful, is deeply, deeply satisfying, fulfilling. Exactly like, you know, when you have eat delicious food, or if you like some good beers or wine or maybe alcohol. I like to take a sip of vodka every now and then. I love vodkas. I'm not a whiskey man, never was. But you know, when we, for example, when we eat or drink something really delicious, it fulfills us in a different way than, you know, can of tuna. You know, tuna fish from a can. So, you know, when we eat delicious food and it, you know, we eat enough so that it fills our belly, we become satisfied. Well, not less than fantastic manner. So this is a very good analogy, although, you know, our next meal might be a can of tuna, you know, but it's a good analogy for the aliveness aspect or enjoyment body of our awakened nature. And this, when I said blissfulness, aliveness, liveliness, these are words that I usually use. That's also the body of, that's the Divine Mother. So I feel very fortunate that my tantric journey, my tantric path, years ago started with I started with Kriya Yoga, but Kriya Yoga, it's kind of a general term or a popular term that is a, you know, Kriya Yoga practices can contain both Shaiva and practices and deities from Shaiva or Shakta traditions. So I was fortunate to, I studied many schools of Kriya Yoga and received teachings from masters directly. So I feel fortunate that I started that way because, especially now in retrospect, I started practicing Hindu Tantra in 2006. And in retrospect, at some point I felt like, you know, I was actually not happy with my past of training. I was not happy with Kriya Yoga that I practiced, and I wasn't happy with Zen Buddhism that I started with. But now a little bit later, I'm actually feel very fortunate because I learned I didn't have bhumi openings or perfections. I didn't have any of those bhumi events. I didn't have awakening experiences from, you know, from dualistic way of seeing things into non-dualistic way of seeing things. But I learned and experienced a whole bunch of other things. And those other things are what I'm really happy about. And one of those things is loving surrender. Yoga of love and surrender. And there's a Hindu term for that kind of yoga, and it's called Bhakti. Bhakti yoga. Bhakti. Bhakti. Which means like a yoga of devotion. Yoga of loving devotion. So that, what it means is that this also exists in Vajrayana Buddhism, but it's not really, Buddhism is much less emotional than Hinduism is. And there's pros and cons to that. Sometimes I've seen with my own eyes, I've been in India a number of times, and I've seen with my own eyes how yoga of loving devotion can go totally crazy and wild. So people actually become fanatic. It's kind of harmless to become, fanatic about one's spiritual ideal, such as Krishna or Kali or some other god or goddess or deity. But nevertheless, it's incorrect to practice like that. It's not meant to, you're not supposed to, well, it's just unhealthy. And it doesn't work that way either in the long run. But, maybe it's good for somebody at some point of the karmic journey to spend a few years or a decade or a couple of decades doing that. Maybe there's something. The lights go on sooner or later. So then we will make the adjusting corrections. But yeah, so what I was saying is that what Bhakti Yoga is about is that you start expressing the love and care and kindness that is in you. You start expressing it, and you start expressing it towards your guru and towards the deities that you've been empowered to practice. It changed my life back in the day. So I came to Hindu Tantra and Bhakti Yoga after 4 years of Zen Buddhism. I practiced 8 hours or more every day, sitting that much. And it was, like I said, from the point of view of having awakening experience, it was a dead end. So I was, I followed the instructions verbatim. Always followed the instructions as they had been given, did everything what my teachers asked me to do and more. But from the point of view of awakenings, it was a dead end for me. And I practiced mostly Rinzai school of Zen Buddhism, which is like well, you could kind of make a caricature and say that it's the samurai school of Zen Buddhism in Japan. So it's very macho and strong. A lot of determination and concentration. Never wavering. Like warriors can't waver in a battle or fight. So you just, go at it. But because of that style of practice, I only practiced 4 years, but if you count the hours, I did a lot of practice. So after that much practice, I felt like coming to learning a very different and softer and loving and practice style that was brimming with love. It felt awesome. It felt just the right thing. So like I have told, when I was introduced to the whole genre of Hinduism and Hindu Tantra through Yogananda's autobiography that discussed Babaji. Babaji is one of the great masters, gurus, a mystical figure. So I learned about Babaji the first time from Yogananda's book, and I also learned in the lineage that I first started practicing Kriya Yoga, I learned about this idea of cultivating love. Just love, 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 love. Just pouring out love. So I learned about Babaji and I started practicing Guru Yoga with Babaji, saying his mantra, saying his name, and just, being flooded with Babaji's waterfall of blessings. So, for example, those two things, loving devotion and Guru Yoga, I learned first in Kriya Yoga, in Hindu Tantra. And I kept, I learned like a daily program of Kriya Yoga practices that, did some chakra techniques, breathing practices, Guru Yoga, and so on. A bit similar to what we have in Rainbow Body Yoga. But the most important to me was Guru Yoga with Babaji. And as you know, our Sangha members, Amrita Mandala folks, you know that, Babaji's Guru Yoga is something that we've done for years in our Sangha. So, many of you already have first-hand experience of his presence and his blessings. So my point is that there are different approaches, different takes on spiritual methods. And, Buddhism and different styles of Buddhism, they have their own features. But also, if we look at Hinduism, Hinduism, just like Buddhism, it's a vast complex of vast array of different styles of different views, different kinds of teachings and practices. But again, when I say Hinduism, my experience, I usually mean Shaiva Tantra or Shakta Tantra. Shaiva Yoga or Shakta Yoga. So I hope that my students, what the things that I'm speaking now, it might take you years of practice to understand and even begin to understand. But also the way how I teach is, when I teach, I don't hold back. I explain everything because it is much more beneficial to you. You get the fruits much faster than if I left things unsaid. But even then, it might take you years to even start to understand. And back in the day, it used to be even worse. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, when you were decided that, well, heck, I don't want to work in the office 9 to 5 anymore, and I want to dedicate my life to the path. And then you went out and started walking, and then after 2 years you finally made it to the foot of the mountains, be it any mountains, maybe Himalayas, and then you started walking up and down the mountains and asking the locals, have you seen any practitioners or gurus who might give me some teachings? And then you walk another 2 years to find some cave, and there you find somebody who's willing to teach you. And back in those days, the teaching style was very different. It's actually a bit similar how I teach, but also very different because if you read, there is a wonderful book. There's a translation by Keith Dowman. It's called something Enchantment. Is it Masters of Enchantment? That has short biographies of the 84 Mahasiddhas. And they are just legends and stories of, masters and siddhas, mahasiddhas in the back in the old days. And you went there and you knocked on the door of the cave, and at first there's no answer, and then you keep knocking. Hello, is there anybody there? And then you might hear a grunt, like this kind of angry grunt. Who the hell is there? That's what the grunt says. And then you start the whole process of, you go and get some flowers from the nearby mountains and you get a flower of bouquet, bouquet of flowers as a gift. Then you run to the village to get some bread and cheese and maybe meat and vegetables, Can I talk to you? You approach this yogi or yogini, could be male or female. You start approaching this guru and all you get is for another year or another 2 years. And by this point, 5 or 6 years has passed, right? But then you keep bringing the flowers, you keep bringing oil so that the guru in the cave can keep a candle flame. You keep bringing firewood. You keep bringing these you keep taking care of the basic necessities of the yogi or yogini. And finally you get to talk with that person. You can think that it's, if you want to think that it's a woman, you can. If you think that it's a man, please do. And little by little you have proved that you're somebody who has genuine interest, because you've been hanging around for 1 or 2 years, bringing this gift, supporting that yogi, and in that way you've expressed that you might have the capacity to become a practitioner yourself. This is how it was back in the days. Very different than nowadays. So then again, time goes by, and you may be allowed to, the master allows you to move in with the cave, and you're just sweeping the floor and making the firewood and making tea and cooking rice and cooking food, stuff like this. And then one day, if you're still there, year or 2 years later, the master says, okay, I will teach you. You have proved yourself. And then he takes his sandal and slaps you on the head. There you got the empowerment. And then the master tells you, okay, now you go and practice. So, what happens in Tantric Empowerment is that, as you know, there is a stream of blessings. There is a stream of energy coming into your system, into your body. And this energy can be transmitted as simplest through an action like that. Or it can be like an extensive ritual ceremony that lasts for half a day, or sometimes even days. But the principle is that when tantric practices are passed forward, given to students, that there is a charge. And then you go and practice. And I'm, got sidetracked a long time ago, but so it might be that that's the only instruction you get. And then you're supposed to go and do the practice on your own and figure it out by yourself. So my style of teaching is quite similar to that one. As you know, I give empowerments, transmissions of different kinds, various types, but I also explain a lot, so that so that when you leave the cave and go practice on your own, so that you wouldn't have to scratch your head that much. So that's where the instructions come in handy. What I like about especially Rinzai Buddhism that I started with is that there's a lot of that kind of raw spirit left in that style of Zen. This has pros and cons, but there aren't many traditions that have that raw spirit anymore. And I also think that Westerners, us Westerners, would find it I think it's actually something necessary that Western practitioners of Dharma need to develop, is to learn how to listen. It sounds simple, and we might be listening, but we might not be understanding the depth. And also there's of course the factor that according to studies, you listen some percentage, you're able to understand and absorb some percentage of what you're being instructed. But also I know that from my observations of my students throughout the years, that people pick and choose. You take this bit because it sounds nice and good, but you don't take this one. So you pick and choose, and this is a problem. This is a problem currently in our Sangha, I think, but I'm not going there because it would be a long night if I did. So I was talking about principles. So before I started to narrate the very typical image of how learning Tantra was back in the days, I was speaking about the enjoyment body and Divine Mother, and how Divine Mother, known as enjoyment body, is also in Buddha Dharma and Buddhist Tantra. So one thing is that the way how we always, whether it's whatever the practice is, whatever the tradition is, whatever the system is, the way how the simplest way to validate the system, validate the practice, this is actually very simple. But as you know, when we say something very simple, we know that there must be a lot of depth to that statement. So when I say that you can validate any practice, any lineage, any method by the clarity of mind that it gives, your mind becomes clear, sober, clear. You become clear-headed, no longer busy, no longer foggy or cloudy, no longer distracted. I could even say that not even concentrated. So, in short, becoming clear-headed, clear-minded. That's very important. 2, becoming soft, loving, soft. Soft like the belly fur of a rabbit or a cat. Very soft. So that's 2. If you have only the second one without the first one, then we have a problem. Because, well, I'll just say that then we have a problem. And then the third characteristic is that you become grounded, settled, stable, not being tossed around or moved, not being affected by winds. These are the same 3 basic characteristics that I have taught for years and years on many retreats, and you have heard me speak about those before. But these 3 need to be there, and these 3 are there with all Buddhist practices. And then, you have heard me discuss about the similarities and differences of Hindu Tantra and Buddhist Tantra, and I always speak about how you can plateau with Hindu Tantric practices because of the second principle of blissfulness and aliveness, because that is different in Hinduism than it is in Buddhism. Buddhism it's like a product. It has been designed, it has been theoretically designed, and it has been energetically designed. Same with Hinduism, but the design is different. So, if we don't know about the 3 basic characteristics, clarity, aliveness, groundedness, then we, like I said, if we don't know the first one and get too carried away by the blissfulness, then we will plateau. I plateaued for I don't know how many thousand hours of practice, but I did. And that's why I know to talk about this, to bring this up. Well, maybe I won't say anything about that more, and maybe it's time to take this into practice. So, Divine Mother sessions, Shakti sessions. Let's continue with practice.